today. Great to have you with us if you're joining us online as well. My name is Steve. For anybody who I've not met here before, I'm part of the lead team here. And if you are new with us today, then it is fantastic to have you with us. So usually we'd have a question. This week we've mixed it up a bit and we've had a game of Spot the Difference. Does anybody think they've found them all? Yeah. There are 9 differences. Did you find 9? Anybody find all 9? Okay, shout them out. Let's have the picture. Let's have the original up for us, Summer. Let us know. What did you see? Agnes's clothes, the glasses. The giraffe. Did you notice that one? Ah. My mother-in-law's not here today. Please don't tell her that I changed her to be a giraffe. What else did I hear? Sorry. Yes, there's a slight change in the lyrics there. Good spot. Hat. Glasses, guitar. Anybody notice the bottled waters went? Yeah, we heard that one over there. Okay, so let's have the answers up. There's one that nobody's said. There we go. In that bottom corner, there's some new people there. Anybody see that one? No. Oh, you did see that one over there. Oh, Evangelist. Well done. Evangelist is the winner, everybody. Let's hear it for Van. Well done. Super. We're playing a game of Spot the Difference today just for a bit of fun. There's no relevance whatsoever. No, there is relevance. I am a details kind of person. I love detail. Anybody with me on that? People just like details? Anybody just not a details person? You're just not too bothered about the details? We are very different, aren't we? I love details. I am the sort of person who would sit through a film or a TV series or a sporting event, and I'll have one eye on what's going on the screen, but another eye on Wikipedia or IMDb and researching who's this person, what's going on, what are these stats. That's the kind of person that I am. I know it's a bit sad, isn't it, really? But I love things like football stats. Last weekend, I found myself going right down a rabbit hole on the Athletic app on my phone, where I follow my beloved Man United. And I noticed there was this new tab that said squad stats. And so I just started looking at these squad stats. And whilst I was looking at these stats, I discovered it says the players' birthdays. And I was fascinated to find that in a squad of over 30, nobody has a birthday in June. Exactly, that's the reaction I got from Ruth when I told her my amazing discovery. She basically told me nobody's really going to care about that apart from you in a polite way. But details are important. I think you'll agree with me that details are important when it comes to recipes. And I have a few recipe faux pas to just share with you, because I love cooking. I do enjoy cooking. There's something that maybe you didn't know about me. But I love particularly cooking Chinese food. And so I love that because it saves me spending money on Chinese food. It's cheaper that way, isn't it? And so I had this recipe a few years ago for crispy, crispy shredded chili beef. Anybody like that one? I've got a fantastic recipe I can pass on to you. And we had some people over that I made this recipe for, and they were very polite. And they said it was nice, but it was very spicy. And I was like, oh, that's good. You clearly don't like spice. But then I discovered afterwards that I had mixed up these key letters, TSP and TBSP. And so I had put 1.5 tablespoons of chili flakes in instead of what should have been 1.5 teaspoons of chili flakes in. Who knows that it's good to encourage your children to eat salad? Yeah, and fruit and veg. And so it's every parent's dream to find a recipe that really works for this. And so I found this great recipe for a nectarine salad. Anybody like nectarines and salad? Again, I can pass it on to you after the service today. It's fabulous. And I made this dressing that's for the recipe, and my kids were literally asking for more salad. I thought, this is brilliant, until I discovered afterwards that part of the dressing involves maple syrup. And guess who got mixed up teaspoon and tablespoon? Me. And so they were guzzling this salad like it was Haribo because it was full of maple syrup. My final kind of recipe faux pas is that a few years ago, one of my children asked if they could have a Colin the Caterpillar cake made out of donuts. And I love making donuts, and so I thought, challenge accepted. Here's what I came up with. Do you think I'd get through on the bake-off? Maybe on the appearance, but when we shared this with our wider family, again, people were very kind. But their kindness was that they just didn't say anything. And again, it wasn't until afterwards that I realized that one of the key ingredients in this recipe is water. And if you don't put water in the donut dough, it can taste a little bit off. And so it didn't taste great. As I've said before, I love and I think details are super important. But the thing is, when we miss certain details, things have a habit of not quite going to plan. And as we look today together, we're going to look at our final part of our series on Joseph, on the character of Joseph. We've been journeying through Joseph's life, and we've been looking together at how he has the faith to face different opposition that comes in his life. I love details, but I am also prone to missing things. And as we look back at the story of Joseph, we're going to look together at how ultimately God is a God of great detail. And so this message today is titled Attention to Detail. As we've been exploring this story, what we find when we look back is, and what we'll discover together today, is that God is there in every detail of Joseph's life. And just as we kind of bring in some context, just as we heard from Lois in her fantastic message last Sunday, we're at this point now where Joseph is in Egypt, and he's in this prominent position, and he's in this prominent position as prime minister of Egypt because he was able to interpret Pharaoh's dreams. And part of interpreting his dream was to tell Pharaoh, look, there's going to be 7 years of having plenty. There's going to be 7 years where we need to store up. Why? Because then after that, there's going to be a 7-year famine. And so we arrive in this part of our story when Egypt is experiencing this great famine. Now, this famine has spread far and wide, and it's affecting the land of Canaan, which is what we would call today modern Israel and Palestine. And so as we arrive into our story today, what we find is that Joseph's father, Jacob, who at this point thinks that Joseph is dead, he sends his brothers to Egypt because he's heard that there might be food available for them in Egypt. And then we get this amazing, complicated, and dramatic ending to the story of Joseph. So I'm going to read a few verses. It says this in Genesis 42. Now Joseph was the governor of the land, the person who sold grain to all its people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him. That was fulfilling Joseph's dream that he shared with his brothers, with their faces to the ground. As soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. Where do you come from? He asked. From the land of Canaan, they replied, to buy food. Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. And I'm going to invite Ephemina up to the stage now, who's actually going to read the next part of it for us. But before she does that, we can't cover everything that happens in the gap between what Lois shared last week and where we're at this week. But in summary, what we get is that Joseph toys with his brothers who didn't recognize him. He makes them go back and get their youngest brother, Benjamin, much to their father Jacob's despair, because he's worried that if I send my beloved youngest son, what happens if something happens to him like it did to Joseph? And then eventually the brothers return to Joseph. And here's where we get the conclusion of this story.
Genesis 45, 1-13. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence." So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But his brothers were not able to answer him, because they were terrified at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now, do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now, there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then, it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of all Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, this is what your son Joseph says. God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me, you, your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and all you have. I will provide for you there, because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise, you and your household and all who belong to you will become destitute. You can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that it is really I who am speaking to you. Tell my father about all the honor accorded me in Egypt, and about everything you have seen, and bring my father quickly down here.
Fab. Thank you very much, Ephemina. And so here is what we see from the kind of conclusion, if you will, of this reconciliation story as Joseph sees his brothers again and reveals himself to them. We see this, and this is our kind of main point for today, that God is in the detail. God is in the detail. As Joseph looks back over his life, he can see that God's hand has been on him and his journey at every junction. And we get these phrases in the passage that we've just read. They'll come up on the screen. We get Joseph saying to his brothers, God sent me ahead of you. And then he says, God has made me. He talks about how God has made him Lord of all Egypt. Joseph is able to look back on what has been a very topsy-turvy roller coaster kind of journey and life for him, and is able to see, look, God is in the detail. God was at every point, at every turn. He was there with me in every season. And he could see that despite going through what were some really difficult circumstances, like being sold into slavery by your brothers, he could see that God was there with him. It wasn't necessarily that God caused these things. It's just that God was there in the detail. He was with him. He was there all the time. He was leading him. He was guiding him. He was putting him into different positions of influence. God is in the detail. And the story of Joseph, it ends up being this incredible story of forgiveness and of reconciliation. But I think that it also has some amazing parallels with another person's life as well. And so we're going to play another game of Spot the Difference. And I wonder whether you can see any of the similarities in Joseph's life with somebody else's life. Because way back when we started the series in Genesis 37, we saw that Joseph had some dreams. And the dreams that he had were of his brothers bowing down before him. And it's a dream of Joseph bringing blessing and salvation to many people. And in the passage that we've just read, we see that dream come to reality. As his brothers, they bow down before him, and he rescues them, along with many, from this famine that the land is experiencing. And then hundreds of years later, Jesus would be born to rule and to save the world. Joseph was sold into slavery as the result of jealousy for 20 silver coins. Hundreds of years later, Jesus too was sold out of jealousy for 30 silver coins. Now, those of you who, like me, are bothered by the details, you're thinking, well, 20 silver coins, 30 silver coins doesn't quite match up. But we're told that Joseph was sold for the going rate of a slave in his day. And then 1900 years later, we're told that Jesus was sold for the going rate of his day. And so I just think that God, who is the God of detail, he accounted for one thing: inflation. You with me on that? Do you agree? Joseph, as we found out early in this series, he faced temptation from Mrs. P, but he resisted. Hundreds of years later, Jesus faced temptation in the desert with the devil, but resisted. Both Joseph and Jesus refused to abuse the power that had been given to them. Joseph was accused of a crime that he didn't commit, and he was unjustly sentenced and thrown into prison. Hundreds of years later, Jesus was accused of a crime that he didn't commit and thrown into prison. He was mocked and he was despised. Joseph was joined in prison by how many criminals? See if you remember. 2 criminals. Hundreds of years later, Jesus on the cross was joined by 2 criminals. Joseph spoke life-giving words to the cupbearer, one of the criminals that he was with. Hundreds of years later, Jesus spoke life-giving words to one of the criminals on the cross with him. Joseph went from prison to becoming prime minister of Egypt. It's quite the promotion, isn't it? In the land that he suffered so much in. Hundreds of years later, God would choose to be born into a land that he would suffer in. But through his resurrection, he would become fruitful. He was raised from the dead and seated at the right hand of his Father. Joseph forgives his brothers, saving them, rescuing those who had harmed him. He brought them from a place of famine to a place of abundance. Hundreds of years later, Jesus lays down his life, bringing the possibility of salvation for all of humanity, offering us a way out of the famine that we experience in our lives of sin, and bringing us life in all its fullness. Joseph was born to be a ruler. He's sold into slavery. He's tempted. He goes through years of suffering. He predicts the salvation of a fellow criminal. He's raised up himself by God. He forgives those who sin against him. And he declares that it all happened to save his people. Can you see the similarities with Jesus' life? The parallels are immense, and there's more actually that I haven't mentioned today. But I think they all point to this truth again, that God is in the detail. Just turn to somebody and say, God is in the detail. And so we've seen that in Joseph's life. We've seen the detail that he has in Jesus' life. We've seen those parallels. But what about the parallels today with your life? Have you ever felt insecure about God's love? Have you ever felt unsure about whether or not to follow, about whether or not God will follow through on what you feel he has spoken to you that he will do and that he has promised to you? Have you ever, I wonder, messed up like Joseph's brothers and thought, you know what, there's no way that God can forgive me of this. There's no way that reconciliation can come in this relationship. Maybe there are other parallels that you can see as we look and reflect upon the life of Joseph. But the lesson of Joseph is that ultimately his life points us to a greater version of Joseph, and his name is Jesus. And as we look to Jesus, we can be confident that God planned everything about Jesus' life. And in the same way, today, we can be confident that God is fully interested in every detail of our lives, in every season that we go through. And life, as maybe many of us already know at this point, won't always work out the way that we expected it would. Things happen, seasons come, things change. And we look back on our lives and we think, well, I didn't think I would be where I am today. But today, here's the truth as we reflect on Joseph's life, as we look at the parallels with Jesus' life, we could see, you know what? It might not have gone the way that we thought it has, but let me tell you, God is with you. He will never leave you. He will never forsake you. He is there in every season. His presence is with us. He's there to strengthen us. He's there to bring healing. He's there to bring wholeness. He's there to bring his peace. He's there to bring his comfort in every season that we face. There's one commentator who said this about the parallels between Joseph and Jesus. He said, the parallels here are so numerous and amazing, you would almost think that they had been planned. And the irony is this, that they were planned. Because God is a God of great detail. And as much as we see God at work in every detail of Joseph's life, and we see Joseph's life pointing us to a greater Savior, Jesus, the same is true for your life today. God is deeply concerned with every detail of your life. And maybe there's been times when you have doubted that truth, or you thought that can't be true. But I promise you today, it is. And you know, just to finish with, I want to read from Psalm 139. And I love this psalm because it really spoke to me recently. I was on holiday just a few weeks ago, and I was sat on a beach reading this devotion that was, the kind of whole point of this devotion was just to point and remind you of the creator God that we have, this amazing creator that we have. And just listen to these words today. Maybe you're in that place in your life where you have doubted that God is in the detail, that God is there with you, that his presence is with you. Just listen to these truths today from a man called King David as he just reflected upon who God is. He said this, he said, "You saw me before I was born." That's a mind-blowing truth about God in itself, isn't it? Every day of my life was recorded in your book. Every moment was laid out before a single day had passed. How precious are your thoughts about me, O God. They cannot be numbered. I can't even count them. They outnumber the grains of sand. And when I wake up, you are still with me. And I was on this beach just reflecting on those words particularly, that God's thoughts about us are so precious. And this mind-blowing truth that not only in a room of over 100 and people watching online, but in a world of billions, God is able to think about every detail of our lives. He is there with us in every circumstance, and his thoughts about us are so precious, and they cannot be numbered. And they outnumber the grains of sand. And so I just felt this prompt to pick up some sand in my hand. And you know what? It was an absolutely futile exercise to sit there and begin to try and count the grains of sand. And I didn't get very far before I simply just realized and remembered the truth of this passage. That God is in the detail to the point that his thoughts about us, his precious thoughts about you and about me, they outnumber the grains of sand, not just in my hand, not just on that small beach that I was on, but across the whole world that we live in. That's his thoughts today for you, for me, for Joseph, for Joseph's brothers, for his family as they were reconciled. God is in every detail of our lives. He's with us in every circumstance, and he's there through every season. And the truth is this today. He cares deeply about each and every one of us. And I know that in our church community, in our church family, there are many who are passing through some circumstances that feel like Joseph's felt. Maybe it's loss. Maybe it's confusion, maybe it's doubt, maybe it's frustration, maybe it's thinking like, God, where are you? And I just felt today that God wanted to remind you of that truth. He's with you. He's in the detail. It doesn't mean he's necessarily caused what you're going through. It just means he is there with you, and he promises his presence with you in every season, in every circumstance.